If you're Chinese
Hi.
officials today, what are you saying? What's your word for a deal?
Well, I think the Chinese actually for quite some time, well, since May actually, when the infamous presidential tweet basically caused the trade discussions to basically kind of rupture. Ever since then, I mean, I think if not before, the Chinese have really have an interest actually in spinning these negotiations out for quite a long time, because I think their view is that the longer it's spun out, the greater the likelihood is that President Trump will, make concessions, will almost do anything really for a deal before the presidential election. I think this is basically the last chance for any kind of agreement. It's going to be small. If it is an agreement that can be signed, it's going to be small, limited, and there won't be any phase 2 or phase 3. This is basically it, I think. I think the Chinese know it, yeah.
So, George, then why don't you think the Chinese would accept this? Because at this stage, they're basically getting almost everything they want. Basically, an increase in relatively minor agricultural purchases, no real concessions on some of the bigger issues that the U.S. had been pushing for earlier this spring. And at the end of the day, they get to walk away and potentially wait out this president for whatever phase 2, phase 3 might bring with the U.S.
Yeah, so I think this is, this could be really about what kind of leverage I think Beijing thinks it can actually extract from this current stage of negotiations. Because actually, remember that, the African swine flu that's affected China really badly. I mean, perhaps after half of their stock of hogs actually had to be slaughtered. I mean, they want pork and they want soybean imports. And I think they're quite keen, to get to source additional supplies quite quickly, because it's politically quite sensitive in China. So my hunch is they still are kind of angling to get this to work. But I think you're right in your description, Romain. I think the Chinese, in this particular case, right, they've got everything they want really. This is a deal that could have been done 2 years ago, and if it gets done now, then I think they'll be okay with that.
With regards to sort of working out the details of things like Huawei, things like technology transfers, and some of the IP issues that don't appear to be part of this current preliminary deal, do you think that should the Trump administration get this done, do you think the Trump administration will have, enough sort of mojo, to sort of get those aspects done before we get to November 2020?
Yeah, not going to happen. I mean, these are really, this is fundamentally what this so-called trade war is all about. Of course, it's about trade, but it's also underneath, as I think everybody understands nowadays, not least in Washington and Beijing, this is really about industrial policy, procurement, technology transfer, intellectual property, and ultimately about standards and beliefs and values, which is why I think this dispute has basically dug really, really deep roots. It's just not going to go away. And I think the Chinese will be very reluctant to make any concessions, or even really to have serious discussions about these things, except to the extent that it benefits them to some degree. And remember, they also have a point that they can actually hurl back at Washington, which is, you accuse us of not doing these kinds of things or not playing by the rules, but actually what you're doing within the WTO context in terms of tariffs and other kinds of policies related to that is also illegal. So there'll be a lot of debate about this, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of noise between the two sides about it. But I'd be really surprised if between now and the end of 2020, let's look no further than that, but between the end of 2020, whether there's any kind of coming together or engagement about these really, really sensitive issues.
So, George, as we hear in media and investors, we parse every word, we look at every moment to see if we can figure out in game theory this to make money. What are the tea leaves that you actually are looking at?
Sorry, what are the
tea leaves that tell you this is going to fall apart, this will get done, the next phase is not going to happen? What are the buzzwords, what are the key things you look at?
Right. Well, I think if you look at U.S. trade policy really since President Trump came into office, really, Gone are the days when we used to talk about multilateral deals and big comprehensive trade deals. If you look at the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, if you look at the Japan agreement that was recently signed with the United States, if you look at other kinds of arrangements that the United States has done, these are small-scale, limited, bilateral. They don't really kind of go very far, and so my sense is that I know that the White House would like to kind of champion a deal as being something that they can sell politically to American farmers and to other people in the country as a kind of proof of the pudding of American negotiating prowess. But actually the truth is that this is really very small beer. The big issues on which this conflict has really erupted and continues, I don't think they're going to be really addressed satisfactorily. Not this side of a presidential election, anyway.